Warning, the following podcast is intended for mature audiences only. Listener discretion is advised. If you are sensitive to any content or subject matter in films, I recommend looking up this film on doesthedogdie.com. It is a user-based database of extensive content warnings for pretty much every film you can think of. It basically gives you a heads up to all the potentially triggering topics a movie might have. Check it out and take care of yourself. Welcome back to We Creeps. I'm your host, Evan Exhumed. And just like before, every week I summarize and review a different horror film for people who are a little too squeamish or easily spooked to watch them, but still really enjoy the plot and often end up looking them up on Wikipedia or Googling the ending explained. We, of course, welcome horror movie fans all the same. Even if you, for some reason, decide to rank Scream 3 as your favorite, I'm still gonna allow you to be here. I'm still gonna welcome you. I'm just going to judge you very quietly and privately in my own home. Speaking of Scream, today I will be doing the classic 1996 Scream 1, which was written by Kevin Williamson and directed by the very famous Wes Craven. It stars Drew Barrymore, David Arquette, Neve Campbell, Courtney Cox, Matthew Lillard, Rose McGowan, Skeet Ulrich, Jamie Kennedy, and W. Earl Brown. This film is a 90s classic. It's fun, it's silly, it's self-aware, and later in the films they become even more and more and more self-aware, and I just really enjoy them. So I think you'll enjoy them too. They are a little gory sometimes, so it would make sense that maybe this is just something you skip. If you guys end up enjoying this episode, I will do the rest of the movies, especially considering that Scream 6 just came out this last year and I loved it. So with that said, let's go ahead and get started on this 1996 classic horror, Scream. So the film immediately begins with our main girl, Drew Barrymore, also known as Casey Becker, hanging out at her house waiting for her boyfriend to show up, and she's making some Jiffy Pop. And she gets a little phone call from a creepy-ass voice. Initially, the man on the phone says that it's a wrong number, but then he begins to call back more and more, asking her more questions, kind of flirting with her a little bit. But then eventually he begins to start threatening her, saying that he wants to see her insides. He reveals that he's watching her. And so Casey is a little upset about that. And she says, hey, my boyfriend's going to beat the shit out of you. And he's like, oh, this boyfriend? And we see out by the pool, her boyfriend is tied up to a chair, kind of beaten up, bloodied a bit, and it doesn't look good for him. So Ghostface, who's the villain on the phone, Ghostface then asks Casey to answer some scary movie trivia, and if she fails, her boyfriend's going to die. And unfortunately, she gets the first one right, but the second one's a real doozy, and lo and behold, he gets gutted in the dark, and then the light shines on him and he's just dead as hell. So Casey tries to get away while being chased by Ghostface. She leaves the house, goes to the yard, but he catches up to her and stabs the absolute fuck out of her, which is tragic because her parents had just come home. The parents see the house is a complete mess, and then they go outside and see their poor daughter, Casey Becker, hung from a tree. Tragic. And a little fun movie trivia history lesson here. When this film was first coming out, everyone thought that Drew Barrymore was going to be a main character and be throughout the whole movie. Nobody had any idea that within the first 15 minutes, she was just going to get fucking murdered before the movie even really starts. And so I think that's one of the coolest things about this movie is that going into it, if you had no idea, all your expectations would just be completely subverted. So now we flash to our actual main character, Sydney Prescott, who's played by Neve Campbell. She's just chilling, working on her 1996 computer for homework or something. And there's a knock at the window, and we see that it's her boyfriend, Billy Loomis, kind of a hunk. So her dad knocks, saying that he's going out of town, but thankfully nobody sees Billy. And so they have a little bit of a conversation. We learn that Sydney and Billy still haven't had sex yet. Sydney's a virgin, but, they're kind of working their way up to it. But it does seem that Billy is kind of eager to get that done. But overall, he respects her boundaries, leaves out the window, and we go to the next day, which is at school. Sydney is seeing all of the commotion caused by the two murders by Ghostface last night. There's police everywhere, reporters. We then meet her bestie, Tatum Riley. She gives Sid the update on what happened to Casey and her boyfriend. Then in class, Sydney is called to the principal's office, who is played by Henry Winkler. And he's like really weird. He like touches her chin and like makes her look up at him while she's sitting down. It's just like really uncomfortable. And I'm like not sure why that was included in the movie or who thought that was a good idea, but the principle's really weird. And so we then meet my favorite character, Dewey Riley, who, yes, is the brother of Tatum Riley. And he is a sheriff. And with his boss, he is interviewing her, asking about the deaths because something happened to her family recently that we don't know yet. And it's causing them to just check in on her. So now the gang, the main cast of the film, Sydney's friends, are all hanging out at the water fountain during lunch at school. We've got Sydney. We've got Stu, who is played by Matthew Lillard. We've got Jamie Kennedy's character, who is a horror fanatic named Randy. We've got Tatum, and we also have Billy. So Stu and Tatum are dating. Billy and Sydney are dating, and Randy's just fifth wheeling it, chilling. Stu and Randy are a little bit insensitive about the whole killing and stuff, and they kind of make jokes that maybe one of them did it. But Stu claims to have an alibi, that he was hanging out with Tatum, and just in general, they just kind of keep making jokes about it. And Sid just seems really uncomfortable with it, and Billy is like, hey, you fuckos, stop being so insensitive. So something probably happened to Sydney's family or, friend or something that is causing her to feel really unsettled by these deaths. So we follow Sydney at home, and she looks a little bit melancholy, and she turns on the TV and sees some reports, and one of them is about her mother, who was found murdered and raped a year ago. So this is one of the reasons why she's so upset about all of this, is because her mother has just recently died and was murdered. So Sydney calls Tatum. Tatum says that she's on her way to pick her up after practice so she can spend the night with some friends and not feel so alone, especially considering her dad is out of town. She then gets a call from Ghostface, who she thinks is maybe just a prank, but then Ghostface mentions her mom, implying that Ghostface is the one who killed her. But she is soon attacked by said Ghostface, who is hiding in her house. There's a little bit of a struggle, but she eventually makes it to her room, locks the door, and uses her computer to call 911. Seconds later, like barely even a minute, Billy, her boyfriend, pops through the window and is like, hey, what's going on? Is something wrong? And that's just sus as hell. I don't think that Billy could have taken off the Ghostface stuff that quickly and climbed up the house or whatever, but still, that's just sus as hell. As Billy is comforting her, a cell phone drops out of his pocket, so Sydney immediately suspects that her boyfriend Billy is the Ghostface killer. She runs away, goes to the front door, and then all of a sudden a Ghostface mask is right in her face, but it's actually the sweet and lovable Dewey. He found the mask just sitting on her porch and came to check on her because of the 911 call. So as a result, Billy Loomis is arrested by Dewey. Sydney then goes home with Tatum, who shows up, and with Dewey, at least after she's been interviewed anyway. Just as they're leaving, another new main character named Gail Weathers. She's one of the reporters who reported on Sydney's mother's death, who everybody kind of hates. She tries to get some information from Tatum, and then Tatum's just like, fuck off, and walks away. And then Gail says some pretty horrible fatphobic stuff to her cameraman, Kenny. She's just very mean about that, and I don't like that. We also learn at the station while Dewey is interviewing Sydney that her father has gone missing and did not show up to whatever work conference that he had going on. So they question Billy a little bit. He denies everything, of course. And shortly after, Tatum, Sydney, and Dewey are leaving to head back home, and Gail Weathers, the reporter, rushes up to her and starts asking her all these questions, and Sydney recognizes this Gail Weathers and starts talking a little shit to her because apparently Gail Weathers wrote an entire book about her mother's murder and how she didn't think that the person who was accused, Cotton, was the actual one who did it. So very traumatic, and Gail overall in the Scream series is seen as kind of like a vulture, but she's likable in some ways. Sydney just has enough of her shit though and just punches her in the fucking face, which is a legendary scene. Just as Sydney is settling in Tatum's room, she gets a phone call at their house from apparently her father, so she rushes to the phone to see what's going on, where he is, and it's Ghostface, and he's just mocking her, and he hangs up very quickly before anyone could trace it or anything like that, so she's quite upset. The next day, we learn that Billy has been released. They didn't have enough evidence to keep him confined, and Dewey gives Tatum and Sydney a ride to school. There, of course, Gail Weathers is still trying to find a story, interviewing somebody, And Sydney confronts her, apologizes for punching her in the face, but says that she owes her for pulling all this bullshit with her. And Gail just really doubles down, and she does not think that the person who was convicted for Sydney's mother's death, Cotton, who I guess had slept with her at some point. I guess her mom was having an affair with him. But anyway, Sydney's convinced that this is the guy who did it, and Gail is not. So that's definitely an important plot point, I would say, especially for the sequels. So Sydney runs into Billy at school, and he's like, "You still think it was me?" And she's like, "No, I don't, I guess. I guess since they proved it wasn't you, but I'm still a little upset, and the coincidence and timing was bad." And he's just like, "Yo, like, I know your mom died like a year ago or whatever, but like, you need to like get over that." And she's just like, "I'm not just gonna get over it." And then she runs away, like, kind of funny. They actually make fun of this running away in the Scary Movie series. And I didn't realize how silly her run looked, but she's just like doing that kind of run where you have like a full backpack on and you only have one strap. So you're just trying to, create some kind of stability for it. It's just like, it's a really funny run. So Sydney runs to the bathroom and is hiding in the stalls. People are talking shit about her. And as she gets out to wash her hands, Ghostface is just chilling in one of the stalls, breaks out, tries to attack her, but she does escape, thankfully. We then get a little scene between Gale Weathers and Dewey Riley, the sheriff. And there's a little bit of flirtation there. She tries to get some information off of him, but she seems into him just in general. It's not just professional with her. And Dewey's picking up what she's putting down. So, maybe something will come from that. We then jump back to Sydney and Tatum leaving school. Her boyfriend Stu, and he invites Sydney for an impromptu party. And so Sydney's a little reluctant, but she does agree that she's going to go on and have a little fun. After school, we then go back to the creepy principal. There's a quick shot of the director, Wes Craven, in the Freddy Krueger sweater and hat. He's just like a janitor. So this is a nice little piece of trivia and a little fun thing there. However, the principal is quickly murdered by Ghostface in his office. We then jump to Randy, the horror movie junkie, who works at the video store, and him and Stu are having a little bit of a conversation who they think might be Ghostface, who's the one killing everybody and harassing Sydney. And Randy, in all of these movies, goes through kind of a list of horror tropes and why he thinks that it might be Billy because the girlfriend doesn't want to have sex with him, or all these other sorts of stereotypes and tropes. However, Billy shows up and both him and Stu kind of give Randy a hard time, but Randy's just like, "Bro, how can you not think it's Billy? Like, this dude is so obvious." We then get a little scene before the party showing that all of Woodsboro, which is the setting, I forgot to say that earlier, but all of Woodsboro is locking up for an early curfew to make sure that nobody gets murdered. We then see a quick conversation between Dewey and his boss at the sheriff's department, discussing how the phone calls were traced and they all seem to be coming from Sydney's father, which implies that his phone was stolen or cloned. So there's a little bit of a extra to the mystery there. So Sydney and all of the gang end up going to this party at Stu's house. However, Dewey isn't a complete idiot and he is sitting outside of the party. So he's going to let them have a little fun and just keep an eye on her. He also then runs into Gale Weathers, where a little bit of romance might start happening. So Gale offers to keep an eye on the place with him, and they go on for a little walk around the perimeter. This little bit of romance brewing here. So at the party, they're all trying to figure out what horror movie to watch, and Tatum goes to grab some drinks or beer or something from the garage. Unfortunately, she is locked into the garage, and Ghostface pops up. She originally thinks it's just a prank or a joke because there have been some other kids wearing Ghostface stuff running through the halls of school, but it is not a joke. It is actually Ghostface, and he cuts her arm and she runs away. She tries to get through the garage door, doggy door, but unfortunately gets stuck. And then Ghostface, being a very clever and mean killer, turns on the garage door, and this kills and breaks Tatum's neck. So the party's just about over, and Billy approaches Sydney and wants to talk to her. So he goes upstairs into one of the bedrooms at Stu's house. Meanwhile, Gale secretly planted a camera inside the party to kind of hear some conversations, see what's going on. And she set it right in the living room by the TV so she can see everybody who's sitting on the couch. We then cut to Billy and Sydney's conversation. He apologizes to her for being kind of a dick. She apologizes for having PTSD and overreacting a little bit towards him. and she decides that she's ready to have sex. So they implied have sex up in one of Stu's bedrooms or something. While this is happening, Randy and the rest of the partygoers are watching a scary movie, and one of them says something wrong about one of the tropes of the scary movies, and so Randy goes off into a whole tangent about how to survive in a horror movie. And I'm going to list these rules because they're kind of funny and mostly true for the older horror movies. Rule number 1 is you can never have sex. The virgins usually live. Number 2, don't drink or do drugs. The more sober you are, the more likely you are to live. And finally, the last rule for this movie. Number 3 is to never ever say, I'll be right back, because when you say that, you won't be back. So after listing these rules, a phone call comes to Stu's residence, and Randy picks up, and they are informed that the principal has been murdered by Ghostface. So all the people watching the movie just, I guess, leave and go to the school to see what the hubbub is about. Randy is left by himself and continues to watch the horror movie. Meanwhile, Dewey and Gail go on another little walk around the premises, flirting. She's saying that his real name, Dwight, is kind of sexy, and there's just a lot going on here, and I really love this pairing. Fun fact, David Arquette and Courtney Cox, at some point in the next 10 years, do actually end up getting married in real life. As they are walking, all the kids drive past really fast to go to the school to see about the dead principal, and they fall onto each other and kiss. As they are kissing, Gail gets up and notices that Sydney's father's car is parked in between some trees, meaning that he was kidnapped, or at least the car was dropped off close to Stu's house. I also think it's really weird that no one has noticed Tatum's death yet, because this was a party and people were drinking and stuff, but I don't know. Anyway, back at Sydney and Billy's little post-coitus celebration or hangout, they're getting dressed and stuff, and she's sitting on the bed and she thinks, who did you call when you were taken into the police? Who was the person you got your one free phone call for? He's like, oh, I called my dad. And she's like, no, he was there at the station. He didn't call. And he goes, oh, well, obviously he didn't pick up. And he's like, what, do you think I still did it? And she's like, well, I mean, it would have been pretty clever if you would have used your one free phone call to call me. So that way, you wouldn't seem suspicious or whatever. And just as he's about to say something to her, Ghostface comes out of nowhere and just stabs Billy in the chest. So Billy falls over and Sydney gets the fuck out of there, running through the whole house. Eventually, she gets out of the window, climbs down the roof, accidentally falls on a boat. Yes, Stu's parents are quite rich. This is a big house. And she ends up in front of the garage and sees the mangled corpse of her homie, Tatum, and is very upset about that. Meanwhile, Randy is by himself, chilling, eating some popcorn and watching the horror movie. He's screaming at the person in the horror movie to look behind him, and funny enough, Ghostface is right behind him. Sydney runs to the news van that is sitting there and watching what's going on inside. Gail's cameraman quickly tries to help, and they look at the video footage, seeing that Randy's about to be stabbed, but he says, oh shit, there's a 30-second delay, and then Ghostface then comes out of nowhere and slits Kenny's throat. Cameraman is dead. Sydney, very upset, screams and runs away once more. Dewey and Gail return to the scene. Dewey rushes into the house with his gun drawn. Gail goes back to her news van, sees that Kenny is dead on top of the van, drives away, and then runs into a tree. Not very helpful. Sydney finally makes it back to the house after hiding near a barn or something for a minute. And we see Dewey come out of the house, but he's been stabbed in the back by Ghostface and falls over. Sydney gets more of her steps in by running back to the police cruiser, locks herself in, but Ghostface has the keys, so he gets in. She leaves, runs back to the house again, and we see Randy and Stu both show up to the front door while she's about to close it. Randy has been stabbed. Stu is screaming, it's Randy, he killed Tatum, blah, blah, blah. And Sydney is just not having this. She's a very smart horror movie protagonist because this movie is very meta in a lot of ways. And she's just like, no, I'm just going to shut the door on you both. Good luck. She is able to pick up Dewey's gun. So again, very smart. As she locks the door, Billy is still alive and he stumbles down the stairs, still all bloodied and stuff. And he's like, here, give me the gun. Which I don't know why she gives him the gun because he's totally fucked up. So why would he have a better shot? And he opens the door for a second, and Randy comes running in, and he's like, no, bro, Billy's the one who did it. What are you, crazy? And Billy fucking shoots Randy, and Sid's like, what? And we look at Mr. Billy Loomis, and he's totally fine. It was just corn syrup. He was just covered in some sticky, sweet stuff. Sydney then goes to run away and runs into the body of Stu. And she's like, please, Stu, help me. And Stu picks up a little voice changer and goes, hey there, Sydney. And it's the fucking Scream voice, the Ghostface voice, revealing that it was both Billy and Stu who was pulling all of this bullshit, this hogwash. We then get a little bit of a horror movie monologue here where Stu and Billy reveal that they framed Cotton, the man that was involved with Sydney's mother, and that they were actually the ones to murder her mother a year ago. And the motive, I guess, was that Sydney's mother was having sex with Billy Loomis's father, and it like ruined his parents' relationship. And so he was really mad about that and called her mom a slut. And so that's one of the reasons that he kills her. They also bring out Sydney's father, who they kidnapped. And all of this is happening on, yes, the anniversary of her mother's death 1 year ago that they had killed her. So their whole plot to get away with this is to frame it on the father by cloning his cell phone. They then are going to stab themselves, which they both do, and then shoot Sydney in the head and then make it like a murder-suicide situation. Gail does come to the rescue. She grabs the gun on the counter, points it at them, and says, hey, I have a good ending for this movie. How about I shoot the fuck out of you two and we all survive? But Gail has not really ever used a firearm and the safety was on, so Billy overpowers her and grabs the gun, knocking her the fuck out in the process. But this is very distracting for these two boys, and so Sydney is able to sneak away. And this motherfucker, in the midst of being about to be murdered and shit, grabs the voice box, I guess, and calls the phone of Stu's house and starts fucking with them with the voice box. She's like, hey, what's up, boys? You want to come chase me, you silly boys? And then she pops out in the Ghostface gear and stabs Billy Loomis with a fucking umbrella, I guess, which really hurts. So he falls on the floor and she grabs the knife. Stu comes running and there's a bit of a struggle there. She then hits him in the head with a plate, and as he falls over, she pushes one of those old fucking big-ass, like, 100-pound TVs. She grabs that and just tosses it onto his fucking head, killing him. I mean, the glass shattering and probably cutting his throat, in addition to the weight. So Stu is just fucking dead. So Sydney comes back to check on the situation. Randy is still alive, thankfully. He's freaking out about not wanting to die a virgin. And then Billy comes back to life because she only stabbed him with a fucking umbrella. So I don't know what she was expecting. And he pushes Randy. He straddles her. He's about to stab her in the chest or the face. And then Gail comes back to life, picks up the gun, and shoots Billy Loomis. He falls over, presumably dying, maybe. They look over at Billy's body, and Randy's like, yo, be careful. Usually the villains come back to life for one last scare. And of course, Billy does come back to life for a quick second, and then Sydney just fucking executes him, shoots him in the fucking forehead, and then she says, not in my movie. So a few hours pass, 911 has been called, ambulances are there. Our baby boy Dewey is still alive, injured of course, but still alive. And Gail, without even skipping a fucking beat, gets a new cameraman or something somehow and just starts reporting on the incident. She's like, a real life horror movie. And then the camera sort of tilts to the sunset or sunrise or whatever. And then the movie ends with one quick little jump scare of Ghostface coming at the camera. They're dead, but it's, cute little ending there. And so that was the classic Scream. 1996. What a fun fucking movie. And speaking of fun, I think it's time for a little trick or trivia.
There are certain rules that one must abide by in order to successfully survive a horror movie.
Trivia number 1, the origin of the Ghostface mask is just that it was a Halloween mask. It was a commonly used Halloween mask, just bought at places like Party City or Spirit Halloween. One of the producers, Marianne Madalena, just found the mask while she was scouting for a house for one of the films that she was producing. And she was just like, hey, Wes Craven, this shit looks freaky as hell. Let's use it for Scream. And so he did. They ended up getting the licensing rights from Funworld, who had created the mask. They made some changes to make it more their own, but they ended up settling on what we know as Ghostface today. And Fun World actually still owns the rights to the Ghostface masks, believe it or not. Bridget Slyerton was the person who chose the final concept design that would be known as Ghostface today. Trivia number 2, Ghostface was actually going to be in a white robe until someone in the production team said, hey, white robes and murderers are pretty common in another scary thing, a little thing called the Ku Klux Klan. So they quickly changed it to black after realizing that. Trivia number 3, did you know that Roger Jackson, the voice of Ghostface, actually plays another famous character, Mojo Jojo from the Powerpuff Girls? Yes, Ghostface is also Mojo Jojo, who is far less terrifying, but still quite formidable. Final piece of trivia, Wes Craven, in the very beginning of Scream, is actually the one in the Ghostface outfit. He's the one who did all the stunts for that. And during that scene, when she hits Ghostface in the face with a phone, that was real. She actually just reacted to him because she was so freaked out by the scene. She was very in the moment that he actually got hit in the face with that goddamn phone. And they ended up keeping it because it was such a damn good shot. Hope you enjoyed that little bit of Scream trivia, because that's all I've got for now.
What's your favorite scary movie?
I don't know.
You have to have a favorite.
With all that said, thank you so much for joining us again this week on We Creeps. Really appreciate all those weekly listeners and appreciate those people who just tune in whenever they see a movie that they're interested in. Please do be sure to support the podcast by following me on all of my socials, Instagram, Twitter, Tumblr, YouTube, anything really. If you're loving the show, do please leave a review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. If you want to support the show and keep it going, please check out my Patreon. You get episodes a day early. And I also have merchandise. So you can go to tpublic.com and just look up We Creeps and you can get a Stay Spooky Out There shirt or a We Creeps logo shirt. They're all great, size inclusive, customer service is awesome, and it just shows me that you love the show. I hope that you have a wonderful start to your week. I hope you enjoyed the episode, and make sure to use star 69. Otherwise, you might forget to stay spooky out there. I can't really do the voice, but just don't forget to stay spooky out there.